Not legend, but the ordinary turn of a day that never made the pages of heroic epics. In a world where the only dragons are the cold winds that scour the birch forest, you will find no shining swords, only an axe that bends a little with each swing. Fantasy tells of shining armor and grand quests. The reality here is a thin loaf, a cracked hearth, and the steady patter of snow against the roof of an izba. The bravest thing you do is carry a bundle of firewood back to the pit without dropping a splinter. If these slow, steady words help you unwind, feel free to like, share, or simply let them drift past you like a gentle winter sigh. You are welcome to leave a quiet comment, perhaps a note of where you are listening, or a small thought about the night you spent under a low ceiling. The fire fades to a low glow, the smoke curls lazily upward, and the world outside is hushed. Step forward and let the story begin. You rise before the sun, the thin gray sheet of January sky already pressing against the horizon like a cold hand. The air in the izba is still scented with the faint, sweet resin that drifts from the small stove where 3 other families have shared the night's heat. You pull the woolen socks from the woven basket, each stitch a labor of the women who sit together in the evenings, their fingers moving in the same rhythm as the loom's shuttle. The wool is thick, the fibers still warm from the fire, and as you slide the socks over your feet, you feel the soft resistance of the worn cotton beneath, a reminder that even the simplest comforts are borrowed from the previous days. Labor the floorboards beneath you creak, damp from the night's fire, their sighs rising like a low chant that has become the house's morning hymn. You pause, listening to the faint pop of embers as they settle, the sound a quiet punctuation to the darkness that still clings to the corners. A thin wisp of smoke curls upward, curling around the low wooden beams, and you inhale the mixture of pine resin and the faint, metallic tang of the iron stove door that has been opened and closed countless times. The stove's iron grate is blackened, the surface pitted where the soot has accumulated over the winter months. Each mark a small record of the village's collective need for warmth outside. The world is a monochrome of birch trunks and frozen ground, the snow lying in a perfect, unbroken blanket that muffles the village's usual sounds. The birches stand like sentinels, their white bark stark against the sky, their branches bowed under the weight of the snow, as if the trees themselves are bowing to the season's demands. You step onto the floorboards, the wood giving a soft, muffled thud under your boots, the leather creaking in a rhythm that matches the slow beat of your heart. The boots are patched at the heels, the leather softened by years of use, the soles uneven where the soles have been repaired with strips of old cloth, a small irony that the very things that keep you moving are themselves a patchwork of past hardships. You glance at the axe leaning against the wall. Its iron head is dulled by years of chopping the same spruce trees that line the riverbank, the wooden haft worn smooth where your forearms have rested countless times. The handle bears the faint imprint of your palm, a shallow groove that tells the story of many mornings like this one, when the axe is lifted not as a weapon, but as a tool of survival. The statute of 1832 comes to mind, the quiet order that requires every male serf over 15 to contribute a set amount of firewood to the landlord's store. It is not a command shouted from a balcony, but a shadow that walks beside you, as inevitable as the breath that fogs in the cold air. You lift the axe, feeling the familiar weight settle against your shoulder, the iron cool against the skin of your forearm. The hinges of the izba door sigh in protest as you push them open, the sound a low, metallic groan that seems to echo the distant, muted clatter of the Tsar's decree that still binds you to the land of your grandfather. The door opens onto a world that is both familiar and indifferent, the snow crunching under your boots with each step, each footfall a soft note in the winter's lullaby. The sound is steady, a rhythm that steadies your thoughts, and you find a small, quiet amusement in the way the snow seems to recognize the weight of each step, as if it were measuring the effort of the village's labor. You walk toward the forest's edge, the path a narrow strip of compacted snow that has been trodden by generations of serfs. The air is sharp, each inhalation a thin slice of cold that settles in your lungs and then is exhaled in a cloud that disappears almost as soon as it appears. The scent of resin grows stronger, mingling with the faint, earthy odor of the frozen ground, a reminder that the forest is both a source of fuel and a place of quiet endurance. You pause for a moment, turning back to look at the low silhouette of the village. The roofs are capped with a thin layer of snow, the chimneys releasing thin plumes of smoke that rise in lazy curls, disappearing into the gray sky. The village seems to be wrapped in a soft shawl of silence, the only movement the occasional puff of smoke or the distant clatter of a wooden spoon against an iron pot. A thin line of sunlight begins to edge over the horizon, its pale gold barely touching the snow, turning the white surface to a muted silver. The light catches on the edge of the birch leaves, making them glint like tiny mirrors. You feel the faint pulse of communal life settle around you, a warm shawl woven from the threads of shared labor, shared meals, and shared stories that have been passed down like heirlooms. The promise of the day is simple, to bring back enough wood to keep the hearth alive until the next sunset. The promise is not grand, but it is steady, a quiet expectation that steadies the mind as the world outside remains hushed. You step into the forest, the trees standing close together, their trunks dark against the snow. The branches are heavy with the weight of the season, each bough bending like a tired arm that has carried the burden of winter for months. The forest greets you with a muted hush, the only sound the soft whisper of snow shifting under your boots and the occasional distant crack of a branch giving way under its own weight. You take a breath, feeling the cold air fill your lungs, and notice how the breath forms a thin veil that lingers for a heartbeat before vanishing. The forest feels both intimate and vast, a place where the individual steps of a single serf are absorbed into a larger, timeless rhythm. You raise the axe, the motion familiar, the swing a practiced arc that has been repeated so often that it feels as natural as breathing. The sound of the iron meeting wood is a dull thud, a muted echo that seems to reverberate in your chest. Each fallen log is stacked with deliberate care, the order of the piles reflecting the communal rules that the village has adopted in 1850 to ensure that every household contributes equally to the winter store. You notice a thin crack in one of the logs, a small scar that mirrors the faint scar above your left eyebrow, a reminder of a boyish misadventure 2 winters ago, when a reckless tumble on the ice left a line of white on your skin. The crack in the wood is a quiet testament that even the strongest trees bear marks, just as the people who fell them carry their own paws, leaning against a trunk whose bark is rough under your palm, the texture a reminder of the forest's endurance. From your satchel you pull a piece of stale rye bread, its crust hardened by the cold, its interior still holding a faint sweetness from the previous evening's bake. You break a piece, let it melt on your tongue, and feel a small gratitude settle like the snow settling on your shoulders. The bread is simple, its flavor modest, yet it carries the weight of shared labor, of women kneading dough by the fire, of the quiet rhythm of daily life. You smile at the irony that the same pine boughs that fuel the hearth also feed the rabbit that darts away, indifferent to your toil, as distant as the Tsar himself. You stand, shoulders easing, and return to the rhythm of chopping, the steady cadence of axe against wood, a soothing metronome. The forest's whisper becomes a calm companion, steady as the winter wind, and you feel the day's work settle into a pattern that is both demanding and comforting. The cold bites at your cheeks, turning them a pale pink, but the heat from the exertion spreads through your muscles, a quiet counterpoint to the frost that surrounds you. You notice how the snow, though thick, does not cling to the wood you split. It slides off like a reluctant guest, leaving the logs clean and ready for transport. As the sun climbs higher, the light filters through the branches, casting long, soft shadows that stretch across the snow. The forest seems to breathe with you, each exhalation of wind moving the snow in gentle ripples. You gather the last of the logs, feeling the modest ache in your back, a reminder that the work is never without its small costs. Yet the ache is tempered by the knowledge that each log will feed the fire that keeps the village warm, that each breath of cold air you endure is a step toward the evening's comfort. You turn back toward the village, the path now familiar under your boots, the snow crunching in a steady rhythm that matches the beating of your heart. The low silhouette of the houses comes into view, the smoke from the communal stove rising in thin, lazy curls. You think of the Tsar's decree, of the statute that binds you, and of the quiet resolve that has kept your ancestors here for generations. The forest behind you seems to close its eyes, the trees standing still as if in respect for the labor that has been completed. You cross the main path, the wooden planks slick with frost, and pause at the threshold of the izba. The door is still ajar, the hinges creaking softly as a draft of cold air slips in, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and the distant echo of a church bell that has not yet rung. You step inside, the warmth of the stove greeting you like an old friend, the glow of the fire painting the walls in amber tones. The wood you have brought will soon be stacked beside the hearth, ready to feed the flames that will keep the night at bay. You set the logs down, feeling the weight of them settle into the familiar rhythm of the household. The day begins with a simple promise, a quiet expectation that the fire will stay alight, that the hearth will hold its heat, that the village will endure another winter. The promise is not spoken aloud, but it rests in the steady breath you take, in the soft sigh of the stove, in the muted rustle of the birch leaves outside. You close your eyes for a moment, allowing the warmth to seep into your bones, the quiet of the early morning settling into a gentle, steady expectation. The day, like the snow, lies before you, soft. You step out of the izba into the cold, the door's hinges sighing a tired welcome as you pull the heavy wooden latch shut behind you. The world beyond the low fence is a muted tableau of birch trunks, their white bark dulled by a thick coat of snow that clings like a second skin. The air is sharp, each breath a thin plume that disappears almost as quickly as it is formed, leaving a faint taste of pine resin on the tongue. The sky hangs low, a sheet of pale slate that seems to press down on the forest, muffling any sound beyond the soft whisper of wind through the branches. Your boots, thick and leather-capped, sink a little into the crusted snow with each step, the wood of the floorboards still warm beneath your feet as you cross the threshold. You carry the axe over your shoulder, its iron head a familiar weight, its wooden haft worn smooth by years of grip. The axe has a dull sheen, the metal dulled by countless blows against spruce and fir, the kind of trees that line the riverbank and have fed the village's hearths for generations. You remember the statute of 1832, the quiet edict that obliges every male serf over 15 to deliver a set amount of firewood to the landlord's store. It is not a command that shouts. It is a shadow that has settled over your shoulders since childhood, a presence you have learned to walk with, as steady as the rhythm of your own heart. The forest greets you with a hush that feels almost reverent. Snow-laden branches bend low, their limbs heavy with the weight of winter, resembling tired arms that have carried the burden of seasons without complaint. The ground beneath your boots is a carpet of compacted snow, each step producing a soft, muffled crunch that blends into the background murmur of the woods. Light filters through the canopy in thin, pale ribbons, catching on the icy crystals that cling to the bark and turning them into tiny, trembling stars that flicker for a moment before being swallowed by the gloom. You pause at the edge of a small clearing, the place where you have felled trees before. The axe rests against a fallen log, its head catching a glint of the weak winter sun that manages to pierce the canopy. You lift it, feeling the familiar heft, the balance of iron and wood, and bring it down in a motion that has become as natural as breathing. The thud of metal on wood is dull, a sound that resonates deep within your chest, echoing the steady beat of your pulse. Each swing sends a vibration through your arms, through the bones of your hands, through the very marrow of your being. The logs fall with a quiet finality, their descent accompanied by a soft sigh of splintered wood, as if the forest itself exhales in relief. You work methodically, splitting the trunks into manageable lengths, arranging them in neat rows as you go. The communal rules of 1850, the unwritten agreement that each household must contribute an equal share to the winter store, guide your movements. You stack the logs with deliberate care, aligning them so that the bark faces outward, the grain of the wood pointing toward the sky. The arrangement is not merely practical. It is a silent testament to the order that the village has cultivated over decades, a quiet rebellion against the chaos that the world beyond the river sometimes threatens to impose. A thin crack runs along the side of one of the logs, a jagged line that catches the light and draws your eye. It reminds you that even the strongest trees bear scars, just as you bear the faint, pale line above your left eyebrow, a souvenir from a boyish misadventure 2 winters ago, when a wayward branch had fallen while you were attempting to climb a spruce. The scar is a reminder of the thin line between daring and folly, a line that has softened with time but never fully faded. You run a calloused finger over the crack, feeling the roughness of the wood, the way it mirrors the texture of your own skin. A sudden rustle near a low birch shrub pulls your attention away from the logs. A small rabbit darts out, its white tail flashing like a brushstroke against the snow. It pauses, ears perked, eyes bright, then disappears into a thicket, leaving a faint imprint of its passage in the powdery ground. You watch it go, a faint smile tugging at the corners of your mouth. The irony is quiet, almost imperceptible. The rabbit survives on the very pine boughs you are cutting for fuel, its existence as indifferent to your labor as the distant Tsar Nicholas I, whose decrees echo across the empire like distant thunder. The Tsar's rule feels as remote as the summer fields beyond the frozen horizon, a far-off reality that shapes your obligations without ever entering the warmth of your hearth. You set the axe down against a log and lean against the rough bark of a birch, the tree's surface cold and damp, where the snow has melted into a thin film of water. The wood is still, the forest around you a still life painted in shades of white and gray. You reach into your satchel, pulling out a piece of stale rye bread that has been wrapped in a thin cloth. The bread is hard, its crust cracked, but it carries the faint sweetness of the previous evening's bake, a reminder that even the simplest sustenance is a shared blessing. You break off a small piece, feeling the crumb crumble between your teeth, the taste of grain and a hint of honey lingering on the palate. The dryness of the bread mirrors the crispness of the air, each bite a quiet communion between body and environment. You close your eyes for a moment, inhaling the scent of the forest, pine resin, damp earth, the faint metallic tang of iron from the axe. The smell is clean, almost antiseptic, cutting through the lingering smoke that clings to your clothes from the communal stove back in the izba. The breath you exhale forms a fleeting cloud that drifts upward, dissolving into the cold before it can settle. The moment is brief, a single breath in a long day, but it carries a weight of gratitude that settles on your shoulders like the soft dust of snow you rise, the ache in your muscles, a gentle reminder of the work you have done. The forest seems to lean in, the branches swaying ever so slightly as if acknowledging your presence. The wind picks up, a low murmur that rustles through the needles, carrying with it the distant sound of a church bell, its low tone a metronome that marks the passage of time in this remote corner of the empire. You turn your back to the trees and begin to walk back toward the village, the rhythm of your steps matching the steady cadence of the axe against wood that still echoes in your mind. The path home is a familiar one, a narrow track cut through the snow that leads past the river's edge, where the water lies frozen, a glassy sheet that reflects the pale sky. You notice the way the ice catches the light, turning the river into a ribbon of silver that seems to pulse with a quiet life of its own. The wind whistles through the gaps in the fence, a soft, mournful song that blends with the creak of the wooden gate as you push it open. The village comes into view, its low, thatched roofs huddled together like a family of birds seeking shelter from the cold. Smoke curls lazily from each chimney, thin plumes that rise and fade into the gray above, each one a promise of warmth within. You hear the faint murmur of voices inside the izba, the low hum of conversation that drifts through the thin walls. The scent of burning resin from the stove reaches you, a comforting reminder that the day's labor will soon be rewarded with heat and a shared meal. You pause at the threshold, taking a moment to let the quiet of the forest settle into the deeper stillness of the village. The wood you have gathered rests against the wall, a neat pile that will soon be added to the communal store, its presence a silent testament to the collective effort that sustains the community through the long wintry neighbor. A woman with weathered hands and a soft smile steps out from the doorway, her eyes meeting yours with a brief nod. She carries a small bundle of herbs, dried yarrow and chamomile, tied together with a thin strip of linen. The herbs are a modest remedy for the coughs and colds that winter often brings, a small comfort that the village shares as readily as the firewood. You exchange a quiet word about the weather, the kind of small talk that carries the weight of shared experience without ever needing to be spoken aloud. The conversation is brief, the words simple, but they linger like the faint scent of pine that clings to your coat. You turn back toward the stove, the heat already beginning to seep through the walls, a gentle promise that the night will be softened by the glow of the fire. The axe rests against the wall, its head still warm from the work you have done, a silent companion that will be called upon again when the next day's quota must be met. You feel the subtle ache in your back, a reminder that the body, like the forest, bears the marks of labor, yet it also holds the capacity to endure, to bend without breaking. As you settle onto the low bench near the stove, the crackle of the fire fills the room, a soft, steady rhythm that matches the beating of your heart. The flames dance, casting amber shadows that flicker across the wooden walls, turning the simple space into a sanctuary of light amid the encroaching darkness. You close your eyes, allowing the warmth to seep into your bones, the quiet of the forest still echoing in your mind like a distant lullaby. The day's work has blended into the fabric of the village's routine, each action a thread woven into the larger tapestry of communal life. The forest's whisper remains with you, a calm companion that steadies the mind as the night deepens. In this quiet moment, you feel the steady pulse of the village settle around you like a warm shawl, its fibers worn but unbroken, offering comfort as the world outside remains cloaked in snow. The night settles in, gentle and unhurried, and you breathe out a soft sigh, letting the you step back onto the snow-capped lane, the weight of the split logs settled across your shoulders like a modest yoke, each bundle breathing with the faint scent of pine and the lingering chill of the forest. The village comes into view as a muted tableau, low, thatched roofs huddled together against the wind, their thatch darkened by soot and the occasional stray ember that has escaped the hearths within. Thin plumes of smoke rise from each isba, curling lazily upward before dissolving into the pale winter sky, as if the village itself exhales a sigh of shared fatigue. Your boots, the leather softened by the night's frost, make a soft, uneven thud against the packed snow. The path beneath your feet is a narrow ribbon of compacted earth, edged on either side by the skeletal trunks of birch trees, their white bark stark against the gray horizon. Each step you take is accompanied by the faint creak of the wood in your pack, a reminder that the labor of the morning still clings to you, a quiet companion that will not be easily shaken off. As you cross the main thoroughfare, the low, resonant chant of the parish priest drifts from the modest wooden church at the village's heart. The priest's voice, steady and measured, intones the orthodox Lenten prayers, the syllables rolling over the cold air like a slow tide. This is the period of the great fast, when even the simple rye bread you carry is considered a modest offering after the supper, a token of humility that mirrors the restraint demanded by the season. The prayers seem to wrap the village in a thin veil of reverence, a gentle reminder that the spiritual and the material are intertwined in the same thin thread of daily survival. Mikhail, your neighbor, steps out from his doorway just as you approach the communal fire pit. He is a broad-shouldered man, his forearms marked by a scar that tells of a past mishap with a broken plowshare, a scar that has faded in color but not in memory. He nods, his breath forming a brief cloud that disappears as quickly as the thought of the landlord's demands. "Good morning," he says, his voice low, the words carrying the weight of a man accustomed to the rhythm of the land. He mentions the recent edict of 1845, the one that nudged the serf's share of the landlord's grain ever slightly higher. The edict, a subtle shift in the balance of obligations, is a reminder that the weight of authority sometimes lands unexpectedly heavy on the people's backs, even when it is couched in the language of adjustment. You exchange a brief, dry comment about the stubbornness of winter, noting that the snow refuses to melt any faster than the landlord's demands. The irony is quiet, a soft smile that flickers in the corners of your mind, as if the world itself were chuckling at the stubbornness of both ice and power. You set the logs down beside the communal fire pit, arranging them with a practiced hand. The pit is a shallow depression in the packed earth, lined with stones that have been warmed by countless winters. You lay the logs in a crisscross pattern, the same arrangement passed down through generations, known to keep the fire burning through the night without needing constant attention. The wood settles with a soft thud, each piece finding its place as if the pit itself were a patient host waiting to be fed. The first spark catches, a tiny orange heartbeat that flares into a modest flame. The firelight flickers, casting soft shadows on the wooden walls of the surrounding isbas, the shadows dancing like quiet spirits that have been invited to linger for a while. The heat radiates outward, a gentle warmth that reaches the cold stone floor and the worn wooden beams, coaxing the chill from the air. You hear the soft scrape of the baker's wooden spoon against the iron pot as she tends the dough for the next day's kvass, the rhythmic sound a comforting metronome that blends with the crackle of the fire. You pause, feeling the ache in your back from the morning's work. The muscles in your shoulders, still tingling from the weight of the logs, begin to loosen as the heat seeps into your skin. Near the fire, a small, half-finished wooden toy lies abandoned, a tiny horse, its legs uneven, its body carved with the earnestness of a child who has no horse to ride but dreams of the steppe. The toy is rough around the edges, the wood still bearing the faint scent of fresh pine, a reminder that even in the harshness of serf life, there is room for imagination. You smile, realizing how the simple act of carving a toy can be a quiet rebellion against the bleakness that surrounds you, a tiny assertion that hope can be shaped from the same timber that fuels the fire. The baker, Anya, moves nearby, her wiry frame bent over the dough. Her hands are scarred from decades of kneading, each mark a testament to the labor that sustains the community. She pauses, wiping a fleck of flour from her cheek, and offers you a small piece of the rye loaf that has just emerged from the oven. The crust cracks softly under your thumb, releasing a faint, earthy aroma that mingles with the smoke. The bread is dense, the kind that sustains a family through the long, dark evenings of winter, yet it smells of life, of wheat fields that lie dormant beneath the snow, of the promise of a future harvest. You take a bite, the crumb breaking gently, the flavor solid and comforting, as if the bread itself acknowledges the quiet patience required to endure the cold months. You share a few crumbs with a child who sits on the threshold, his eyes wide as he watches the rising steam. The child asks why the village must give so much wood to the landlord each winter. You answer with a half smile, noting that the landlord's manor sits far beyond the river, its windows glowing like distant stars even in the bleakest nights. The child nods, his curiosity a quiet ember that will perhaps one day kindle a different kind of fire. Around the fire, other villagers begin to gather. The scribe, a thin man with a goose feather quill tucked behind his ear, pulls a fresh sheet of parchment from his satchel. He begins to record the day's contributions, his ink flowing in steady, deliberate strokes. The ledger, a communal record kept since the reforms of 1844 that aimed to standardize obligations, lists each household's contribution of wood, grain, and labor. The act of writing is itself a ritual, a way of giving shape to the intangible agreements that bind the community together. You watch as the scribe writes your name beside the tally of logs you have delivered, the numbers modest but sufficient for the night. The ledger is more than a bureaucratic document. It is a quiet testament to the serf's disciplined record-keeping, a mirror that reflects both the burdens and the cooperation that sustain the village. The ink, dark against the pale parchment, seems to absorb the firelight. Each letter, a small flame of its own. A faint wind slips through the cracks in the walls of the communal hall, carrying with it the scent of pine and the distant clatter of children's laughter as they chase each other around the snow-covered fences. The sound is muffled, as if the world outside were listening, respectful of the interior's calm. You notice a thin line of frost forming on the low ceiling beams, delicate as lace, a reminder that even the heat of the fire cannot entirely banish the winter's reach. You feel the subtle ache in your left hand, a thin line from yesterday's axe work that now throbs faintly with each movement. The wound is small, a reminder that even a modest cut can become a lesson in patience, a quiet prompt to tend to oneself even as you tend to the needs of the community. You flex your fingers, feeling the sting subside, the blood flow steady, the skin cooling under the fire's glow. The conversation drifts, low and measured, as villagers discuss the upcoming harvest. Talk of the fields still buried under ice is tinged with a hopeful anticipation that feels both distant and immediate. The elder mentions the recent introduction of a new type of iron plow advertised in a distant newspaper, an innovation that seems as unattainable as a warm summer in this frozen world. Yet the mere mention of progress adds a subtle, almost ironic note to the conversation, as if the village were floating on the edge of an imagined future, its feet still firmly planted in the snow. You think of the 1850 communal rules that encourage equal contribution, the principle that each household must give its share to the winter store. The rule is simple, yet its execution requires the cooperation of every hand, the alignment of every effort. The fire crackles, a soft, steady sound that seems to echo the rhythm of the village's collective heartbeat. The flames lick the logs, consuming the wood that you and your neighbors have felled, turning it into heat that will keep the hearth alive until the next sunset. As the night deepens, the fire's glow steadies, casting elongated shadows that stretch across the floorboards. The shadows move slowly, as if they are listening to the murmurs of the past that linger in the timber. You glance at the half-finished wooden horse again. Its unfinished form now appears less like a child's toy and more like a symbol of potential, a reminder that even in the most constrained circumstances, there is room for creation. The baker, Anya, wipes her hands on a cloth, the fabric rough and stained with flour, and offers you a small cup of warm tea brewed from dried herbs gathered in the communal garden. The tea is bitter, the herbs earthy, the steam rising in thin wisps that mingle with the fire's smoke. You sip slowly, feeling the warmth spread through your chest, a gentle counterpoint to the cold that still clings to the walls outside. The wind has softened, the shutters of the izbas rattling less aggressively, as if the night itself were settling into a quiet breath. The low, distant toll of the church bell marks the passing of the hour, its tone resonant and measured, a familiar metronome that punctuates the evening. The bell's echo fades into the night, leaving behind a sense of calm continuity, a reminder that time moves forward. Even when the world seems frozen, you rise from your seat, the wooden stool creaking softly beneath you, and stretch your limbs, feeling the stiffness ease as the heat seeps into your muscles. The fire continues to burn, its embers glowing like distant stars, a steadfast presence that will not be easily extinguished. You glance once more at the ledger, the ink still fresh, the numbers recorded with care, and feel a quiet satisfaction that the day's labor has been accounted for. that the community's needs have been met, at least for now. The night deepens further, the shadows growing longer, the fire's light dimming as the logs are consumed. You step away from the communal pit, the cold air greeting you like a familiar companion. The snow outside glistens under the faint moonlight, each flake a tiny crystal that catches the fire's dying glow before surrendering to the darkness. You make your way back to your own izba, the path illuminated by the soft glow of the lantern you carry, its flame steady, its light gentle dot inside. The small oil lamp on the table flickers, casting amber circles on the rough wooden floor. You pull your woolen blanket tighter around your shoulders, the fabric warm against the lingering chill. The house is quiet, the only sounds the occasional creak of the floorboards and the soft sigh of the fire in the hearth, its embers still glowing faintly. You sit on the woven mat, the same one you have used for many winters, and allow the day's events to settle into your thoughts like snow settling on a field. Your mind drifts back to the half-finished horse, to the scar on Mikhail's forearm, to the edict that nudged the grain share higher, to the prayers that rose from the church. All these threads weave together, forming a tapestry of ordinary endurance, a pattern that repeats each season, each year, each generation. The tapestry is not grand or ornate, but it is sturdy, its fibers bound by shared labor, quiet humor, and the steady rhythm of fire and frost. You close your eyes, the soft glow of the lamp painting the room in muted amber, and breathe in the scent of pine smoke mixed with the faint aroma of rye bread that still lingers in the air. The breath is slow, measured, a calm inhalation that fills your lungs with the cold, clean winter air, and a gentle exhalation that releases the day's fatigue. In this moment, the world feels both vast and intimate. The village a small island of warmth amid the endless white. The night settles around you like a soft, woolen shawl, its fibers woven from the quiet deeds of the day, its pattern simple yet unbreakable. You feel a gentle certainty settle within you, as reassuring as the embers glow, and let the calm of the evening guide you toward rest. The fire's last whispers fade, the shadows grow still, and the village rests in a quiet, steady rhythm. The stone walls of the communal bakehouse exhale a warm breath that meets the chill of the hallway, and as you step inside, the heat wraps around you like a familiar shawl, softening the stiffness in your shoulders from the morning's labor. The air is thick with the scent of fresh rye, a scent that carries the faint, earthy whisper of the fields that lie dormant beneath the snow, and the low, steady crackle of the brick oven reminds you that the fire has been kept alive since yesterday's stoking, its embers glowing amber beneath a layer of ash that has settled like a thin veil over the stones. Anya, the baker, moves with a practiced rhythm, her wiry frame bending over the wooden table where a tray of loaves rests. The loaves are still warm, their crusts darkened by the fire's kiss, and a thin steam curls upward, disappearing into the dim light that filters through the small, frosted windows. You watch the way the steam catches on the soot-blackened bricks, forming fleeting ghosts that dissolve as quickly as a breath on a cold morning. The loaves themselves are dense, the kind of rye bread that has sustained families through many winters, each slice a compact promise of sustenance that will last through the long, dark evenings. Your fingers brush the rough edge of a wooden bench as you approach, feeling the grain worn smooth by generations of villagers who have sat here to wait for their share. The bench is covered with a simple woolen blanket, its fibers frayed at the corners, a testament to the countless times it has been folded and stored away during the brief thaw of spring. You take a moment to notice the faint pattern of a faded embroidery along its edge, a tiny motif of a birch leaf, perhaps, stitched by a hand long gone, now only a whisper in the fabric. The baker's hands are scarred, the lines on her knuckles telling stories of dough kneaded through countless seasons. Each scar is a quiet record of the labor that sustains the village, a map of perseverance etched into skin that has known both the sting of cold and the heat of the oven. She slides a fresh loaf onto a wooden shelf, the wood still warm from the heat that has risen from the hearth. The loaf settles with a soft thud, and you can hear the faint sigh of the wood as it accepts the weight, as if the bench itself is breathing in rhythm with the fire. You remember the decree of 1842 that required all serfs to attend church on Sundays, a rule that still shapes the village's weekly cadence. The echo of that law is present even here, in the way the bakehouse opens its doors early on the Sabbath, allowing the faithful to gather before the service, their bellies filled and spirits steadied. The faint incense drifting from the nearby chapel mingles with the aroma of the bread, a subtle blend of sacred and mundane that seems to bind the community together in a single, unhurried breath. Anya's eyes meet yours for a moment, a brief flicker of acknowledgement that passes like a shadow across a candle flame. She does not speak. The language of the kitchen is one of gestures and shared glances, a quiet communion that needs no words. You reach for a slice, feeling the crust give way under your thumb, the crumb breaking with a soft, dry sound that is almost musical in its simplicity. The texture is firm yet yielding, the interior dense with the earthy flavor of rye, a flavor that carries the faint bitterness of the winter wheat that lies beneath the snow, waiting for the thaw. You lift the slice to your mouth, and the first bite releases a warmth that spreads through your chest, a gentle heat that seems to echo the fire's own glow. The bread is not sweet, but it holds a subtle sweetness that hints at the honey that was once added to the dough in better years, a reminder of the small luxuries that have become memories in the cold months. As you chew, you feel the grain of the rye against your teeth, each particle a tiny, solid piece of the land that you cannot touch but can taste. A child sits on the threshold of the bakehouse, his small hands clasped around a wooden spoon, his eyes wide and bright as he watches the steam rise. He is wrapped in a woolen coat that has seen better days, the cuffs frayed where his fingers have tugged at the hem. You break off a piece of the loaf and hand it to him, the bread crumbling slightly in his eager fingers. He looks up at you with a smile that is both innocent and knowing, as if he understands that this simple act is a thread in the larger tapestry of village life. He asks, in a voice that is half curiosity, half reverence, why the village must give so much wood to the landlord each winter. The question hangs in the warm air, a small ripple in the otherwise steady flow of the day. You answer with a half smile, noting that the landlord's manor sits far beyond the river, its windows glowing like distant stars even in the bleakest nights. You speak of the landlord's need for fire to keep his own halls warm, a need that seems as distant as the summer fields that lie under the ice. There is an irony there, quiet and dry, that the serfs who labor in the forest to keep the fire alive are the very ones who keep the distant manor's hearths burning, a cycle that repeats each year without fanfare. The conversation drifts, as conversations often do in the bakehouse, toward the upcoming harvest. The fields are still buried under ice, but the thought of sowing seeds in the spring is a thread of hope that runs through the room. Anya mentions the 1850 introduction of a new type of iron plow that was advertised in a distant newspaper, a piece of technology that seems as unattainable as a warm summer in this frozen world. The iron plow, described in glossy prints, promises efficiency and ease, yet the reality of the village's wooden tools feels more honest, more rooted in the soil that has fed generations. The mention of progress adds a subtle, almost ironic note to the conversation, as if the village were floating on the edge of an imagined future that may never arrive, but which nonetheless brightens the moment like a candle's flicker in a dark room. You watch the fires glow steady itself, the orange tongues licking the bricks, the heat radiating outward in a gentle wave that reaches the backs of the benches and the faces of those gathered. The crackle of the fire is a low, comforting sound, a metronome that marks the passage of time without haste. The bakehouse, with its stone walls and wooden beams, feels like a womb of warmth, a place where the harshness of the outside world is softened by the simple act of breaking bread. Danya reaches for a pot of sour cream that sits on a low shelf, its surface speckled with tiny white flecks. She ladles a modest amount onto a piece of bread, the coolness of the cream contrasting with the warmth of the rye. The combination is simple, yet it carries a richness that speaks of the village's ability to find pleasure in modest means. You take a bite, the cream's tang cutting through the earthiness of the bread, a balance that feels like a quiet celebration of the day's labor. The bakehouse's windows are frosted, the glass clouded with a thin film of ice that catches the light and turns it into a soft, diffused glow. Outside, the world is a monochrome of birch trunks and snow, the sky a pale, overcast expanse that seems to press down gently on the roof. Inside, the heat creates a pocket of amber light, a sanctuary where the cold cannot reach. You feel the contrast keenly, the way the warmth seeps into your bones, loosening the stiffness that has settled in your muscles from the morning's chopping. You notice a small, half-finished wooden toy lying near the fire, a tiny horse carved by a child who has no horse to ride but dreams of the steppe. The horse's legs are uneven, its body slightly lopsided, yet it holds a dignity that is unmistakable. The child's imagination has given shape to wood, turning a simple piece of timber into a symbol of hope, a quiet rebellion against the harshness of serf life. You smile at the sight, recognizing that such small acts of creation are the threads that stitch the community together, each one a quiet affirmation that life persists even in the bleakest of seasons. The baker, Anya, wipes her hands on a linen cloth, the fabric rough and well used, its edges frayed from countless washes. She looks up at you, her eyes reflecting the firelight, and for a moment you see the weight of years in her gaze, the years of kneading dough, of feeding families, of watching the seasons turn in a world that offers little change. Yet there is also a steadiness there, a calm resolve that mirrors the fire's own persistence. You linger a while longer, allowing the warmth to settle into you, feeling the fatigue of the morning melt away like snow under the sun. The bakehouse, with its simple comforts, becomes a place of quiet reflection, a pause in the endless rhythm of work and obligation. You think of the statutes that bind you, the decrees that dictate your contributions, and the subtle ways in which the community navigates them, turning each requirement into an opportunity for shared effort and mutual support. As the fire begins to settle, its flames lowering to a gentle glow, you take one last bite of the rye, feeling the crumbs dissolve on your tongue. You place the remaining slice back on the shelf, the wood beneath it warm, the scent of fresh bread lingering in the air like a promise. The bakehouse's door, heavy oak with iron hinges, stands ajar, allowing a thin draft of cold air to mingle with the heat, a reminder that the world outside continues its slow, unhurried march. You rise from the bench, the woolen blanket still draped over your shoulders, and step toward the doorway. The stone floor beneath your boots is cool, the heat of the fire still faintly rising from the stones. You pause at the threshold, looking back at the bakehouse, the fire's ember glow softening the shadows, the scent of bread and smoke still present. In this moment, the world feels balanced, the weight of obligations tempered by the simple, steady comfort of shared labor and warm bread. You close the door behind you with a gentle push, the hinges sighing in a low, contented note. The cold air greets you, crisp and clean, carrying the faint echo of the fire's warmth within you. You walk back toward the village, each step measured, the snow crunching softly underfoot, the rhythm of your breath matching the quiet pulse of the day. The bakehouse remains behind you, a warm hearth in the heart of the village, its glow a steady beacon in the winter's hush. The calm settles around you. The night has settled over the village like a thick woolen shawl shrine, its indigo veil pressed close to the low roofs and the crooked chimneys that exhale thin, lazy spirals of smoke. The sky, a muted canvas of cloud, holds the stars at a respectful distance, as if they too are wary of the cold that clings to every stone and timber. From the far-off steeple, the church bell begins its slow, measured toll, a low resonance that drifts through the stillness and finds its way into each izba, each hearth, each breath you draw. The sound is not a summons to prayer so much as a metronome for the night, a reminder that time continues its quiet march even when the world outside is hushed beneath a blanket of snow. You step through the narrow doorway of your own izba, the wooden boards creaking beneath the weight of your boots, which are still damp from the day's work and the lingering steam of the stove. The interior is dim, lit only by the flickering amber of a small oil lamp perched on a rough-hewn table. Its flame dances lazily, casting soft circles of light that wobble across the rough-spun wool rug where you set your feet. The lamp's glow catches on the copper kettle that still bears the faint soot of yesterday's tea, and on the iron nail that holds a stray piece of twine, a reminder of the many small repairs that never quite finish. Your mother's woolen skirt, folded neatly beside the hearth, is still warm where it rested against the fire. The fabric, hand-woven from the thick yarn spun by the village women, bears the faint scent of lanolin and the faint, comforting perfume of the pine resin that has been burning in the stove for weeks. You run a thumb over the soft fringe, feeling the slight unevenness where a thread has frayed, a tiny imperfection that, in the quiet of night, feels like a small story of its own. On the low table lies a thin, hand-written ledger, its pages yellowed by the thin light and the occasional draft that slips through the cracks in the walls. The ledger is the work of the village scribe, a man whose name you never learn but whose hand you recognize by the careful, looping script that climbs the page like a quiet river. The quill, fashioned from a goose feather, has been sharpened to a fine point, and the ink, dark, slightly smudged from the dampness of the winter, stains the fibers of the paper in a way that feels permanent, as if each entry is a small stone set in the foundation of the community. You turn the pages slowly, each turn accompanied by the soft rustle of parchment. The entries are orderly, the amount of firewood each household has contributed, the bushels of grain stored, the days of labor pledged. The numbers are modest, the totals modest, and they speak of a village that has learned to balance its obligations with the harshness of the season. Your own family's tally sits a little lower this year, a slight dip that catches your eye. The column for firewood shows a shortfall, a few logs fewer than the previous winter, and the grain column bears a thin line where a sack was lost to spoilage. The scribe's neat hand has added a marginal note in the corner. Brother's illness, reduced contribution, may he recover. The words are brief, but they carry the weight of a household's collective concern. Your brother's cough, a dry, rattling sound that has haunted the evenings for weeks, is a reminder of how the cold can seep into the body as easily as it settles on the fields. The illness is not the kind that steals life outright. It is the kind that steals vigor, that makes the simple act of rising from a low bench feel like a climb up a hill. Yet even in its persistence, there is a quiet gratitude that the fever has not taken him entirely, that the village's modest herb garden, tended in a small patch behind the communal well, has provided enough dried yarrow and chamomile to ease his breathing. The garden, a patchwork of clumps of sage, mint, and the occasional wild carrot, is a testament to the way the serfs have learned to coax life from the stubborn soil. Even when the frost seems to claim it all, a soft wind whistles through the cracks in the walls, slipping under the doorframe and curling around the low ceiling beams. It carries with it the faint scent of pine, the lingering perfume of the firewood that has been stacked outside for the night, and the distant, muffled clatter of children's footsteps as they play hide and seek among the snow-covered fences. Their laughter, though far away, reaches you as a faint echo, a reminder that even in the coldest months, the village's heart beats in the small, spontaneous moments of joy. You settle onto the woven mat, the rough texture of the wool against your skin grounding you. The lamp's flame flickers, casting a soft amber halo that seems to pulse in time with your breathing. You think back to the story your grandfather told you many winters ago, a tale that has become part of the village's oral tapestry. He spoke of a blizzard that, one year, buried the entire settlement under 3 feet of snow, turning the world into a white, silent cathedral. The storm had lasted 3 days, each day a relentless cascade of flakes that muffled even the sound of the church bell. In the midst of that white silence, a group of serfs, led by a stout man named Ivan, had ventured out with lanterns to retrieve a stray ox that had become lost in the drifts. The ox, a massive creature with a shaggy coat, had been a vital source of milk and labor for the village, and its loss would have meant a further strain on the already thin rations. Your grandfather's voice, though now a memory, had carried a wry smile as he recounted how the serfs, bundled in layers of wool and fur, trudged through knee-deep snow, their lanterns casting trembling circles of light on the frozen ground. They found the ox half buried, its breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. They coaxed it with shouts and pats, and after a struggle that seemed to last an eternity, managed to tie it to a sturdy oak post that had been left standing as a marker for the village's boundary. The ox never returned to the pasture. The snow had claimed its hooves, and the animal perished in the cold. Yet the story ended not with lament, but with a quiet chuckle from your grandfather, who noted that the serfs had learned a valuable lesson. That the land, the animals, and the people were all bound together in a fragile, interdependent web, and that sometimes the effort itself, however futile it seemed, was what kept the community's spirit alive. You close the ledger, the paper's edge soft against your fingertips, and feel the weight of the day settle into a gentle, contented fatigue. The lamp's flame steadies, its light no longer flickering, but holding a steady, warm glow that seems to pulse in rhythm with the distant toll of the bell. The bell's echo fades into the night, a low, resonant note that lingers like a sigh. The wind outside has softened, its howl now a whisper that brushes against the eaves of the izba, as if the world beyond the walls is taking a quiet breath. You rise slowly, the woolen skirt rustling as you move, and step toward the hearth. The fire, though reduced to a bed of glowing coals, still radiates a gentle heat that reaches out to your fingertips. You add a few small pieces of kindling, the dry pine snapping crisply as it catches, and watch as the flames rise, licking the air with orange tongues that dance and then settle into a steady, comforting blaze. The scent of burning wood fills the room, mingling with the faint aroma of the dried herbs that line a small wooden shelf near the stove: dried yarrow, chamomile, and a sprig of sage that has been left to dry after the last harvest. The herbs, like the fire, are small comforts that keep the harshness of winter at bay. You take a moment to look out the small, frosted window. The moon, a thin sliver of silver, hangs low in the sky, its light reflected in the icy surface of the river that runs just beyond the village's edge. The water, now a ribbon of muted gray, moves sluggishly under a thin sheet of ice, its surface broken only by the occasional crack that sounds like a distant sigh. The river has been both a source of life and a source of danger for the serfs. Its spring floods have reshaped fields, its winter freeze has provided a hard path for sleds, and its summer thaw has threatened the low-lying barns. Tonight it is a silent, still presence, a mirror to the sky, reminding you that the world continues its cycles. Indifferent yet reliable, you return to the ledger, now placed on the table beside the lamp. You add a small note in the margin, a quiet acknowledgement of the night's reflections. Brother's cough eases with herbs, gratitude for the garden's bounty. The ink glides smoothly, the feather quill leaving a fine line that catches the lamp's light. You feel a small sense of order returning, as if by recording these moments you are stitching the fabric of the village's collective memory. One thin thread at a time. A soft creak announces the arrival of your mother, her steps slow but steady as she moves across the room. She carries a small wooden bowl, its surface polished by years of use, and places it on the table. Inside the bowl rests a handful of boiled potatoes, their skins speckled with salt, and a few slices of cured pork that have been preserved in the cold cellar. The simple offering is a quiet reminder of the sustenance that the village shares, even when the harvest is modest. She sits opposite you, her eyes reflecting the lamp's glow, and offers a gentle smile that carries the weight of countless winters endured. You both sit in companionable silence, the fire's crackle the only sound that punctuates the night. The warmth spreads through your shoulders, easing the ache that has settled in your muscles from the day's labor. The lamp's flame flickers once more, as if breathing in time with you, and you feel the calm of the moment settle deep within, like a soft blanket draped over a tired body outside. The wind has ceased entirely, and the world beyond the Isba is a still, white expanse. The bell's last toll has faded into the distance, leaving behind a lingering resonance that seems to echo in the very walls of the house. The night, with its quiet promise, wraps the village in a gentle hush, a lullaby of snow and shadow that invites the mind to rest. You close your eyes, the lamp's amber light dimming as the oil dwindles, and let the breath of the night fill you. The ledger rests beside you, the ink still fresh, the words a quiet testament to the day's work and the night's reflections. The fire's glow steadies, the wind outside holds its breath, and the world feels, for a moment, perfectly balanced between effort and ease. In this stillness, you find a calm certainty that tomorrow will bring its own rhythm, its own chores, and its own quiet moments of gratitude. The night settles around you like a soft, familiar shawl, and you drift toward sleep with a heart that You lie on the narrow pallet of the izba, the thin wool blanket pulled up to your chin, the faint glow of the dying embers casting a soft amber halo on the low-ceilinged walls. The night outside presses against the shutters with a quiet insistence, a cold that seems to seep through the very timber, yet the lingering heat from the day's fire keeps the chill at a respectful distance. Your breath forms a slow, steady plume that rises and fades, each exhale a reminder that even in the deepest cold the body keeps its own small rhythm, a metronome that does not falter. In the half-light of the dream, the snow that has lain over the village for weeks begins to melt, not in a sudden rush, but like a tide withdrawing with deliberate patience. The white surface recedes in thin, silver ribbons, revealing the dark, fertile earth beneath, a soil that has been waiting, patient as a monk in prayer, for the moment when the first seed can be pressed into its depths. You feel the earth under your bare feet, cool and damp, the scent of loam rising to meet you, a scent that carries the faint memory of pine sap and the distant echo of the river's winter hush. You walk forward, the field of rye stretching out in gentle undulations, each stalk a slender green blade that catches the pale morning light. The wind brushes the tops of the stalks, making them sway in a slow, synchronized dance, a choreography that seems to have been rehearsed by the very hand of the season. The air is scented not with the sharp bite of resin, but with the sweet, earthy perfume of growing wheat, a fragrance that feels like a promise whispered from the ground to the sky. You notice how the light catches the dew on the leaves, turning each droplet into a tiny mirror that reflects the sky's soft gray, a sky that, in this dream, is no longer a sheet of oppression, but a canvas of possibility. A memory surfaces, unbidden, of the Edict of 1855, the one that allowed a handful of serfs to own a modest parcel of land. The decree was not a grand proclamation of freedom. It was a thin parchment, signed in ink that had already begun to fade, a whisper of change that seemed almost too delicate to be believed. Yet in the dream it looms large, a quiet beacon that flickers like a lantern in a dark hallway. You imagine the feeling of holding a small piece of earth in your hands, the weight of it both literal and symbolic, the soil slipping through your fingers as if it were a secret you were not yet ready to keep. The thought of a plot of your own, however modest, settles in your mind like a moth alighting on a windowsill, soft, tentative, and oddly hopeful. You kneel in the imagined field, the earth cool against your palms, and begin to turn it with a wooden spade that feels familiar despite its imagined nature. The spade's handle is worn smooth by generations of hands, its iron tip dulled by countless seasons of use, yet it cuts through the soil with a quiet efficiency, each thrust a small affirmation of agency. As you work, a gentle voice rises from somewhere beyond the edge of the field, a voice that carries the timbre of age and the cadence of tradition. It is the village elder, his words a low murmur that seems to blend with the rustle of the rye. Obshchina, he says, the word hanging in the cold air like a prayer. We share, we endure, we remember. His tone is neither commanding nor pleading. It is simply the sound of a man who has watched the seasons turn, who has seen the same tools, wooden plow, sickle, pass from one generation to the next, each blade bearing the faint imprint of the hands that wielded it. He mentions the upcoming sowing, the communal decision-making that will guide the planting of the next crop, and the memory of the soldiers who, a few years ago, marched through the Crimean War, their boots sinking into the same soil that now cradles the seedlings you are about to sow. The war, a distant thunderstorm on the horizon of your collective memory, seems both far removed and intimately tied to the very grain that will soon feed those same soft chuckle rises from within you, an amused, almost tender sound that acknowledges the absurdity of how unchanged the tools remain even as empires rise and fall. The wooden plow, its iron tip still bearing the same scratches from a century ago, has not been replaced by any marvel of industry. It is as if the world beyond the river's bend has forgotten the village, leaving it to its own quiet continuity. The sickle, its blade thin and sharp, glints in the dim light, a crescent moon that has cut through countless stalks, each cut a small act of survival. The dream shifts, the field blurring into the interior of the isba, where the fire now burns brighter, its flames licking the stone hearth with a steady, unhurried vigor. The crackle of the wood is a soft percussion, a reminder that even in sleep the mind can hear the familiar sounds of daily life. The scent of pine smoke mingles with the faint aroma of fresh rye bread that has just been taken from the oven, the crust still warm, the interior soft and yielding. You reach for a piece, feeling the crumb break gently under your thumb, the texture a comforting reminder of the labor that has gone into its making. A child sits on the threshold, his cheeks flushed from the cold, his eyes wide as he watches the fire's dance. He asks in a voice that carries both curiosity and the innocence of youth, why the village must give so much wood to the landlord each winter. You answer with a half-smile, noting that the landlord's manor sits far beyond the river, its windows glowing like distant stars even in the bleakest nights. The child's gaze lingers on the fire, as if seeking answers in its flickering light, and you sense a quiet irony in the fact that the same fire that keeps you warm also fuels the distant manor's comfort. The dream widens again, the walls of the isba dissolving into the open sky, a sky now brushed with the soft pinks and golds of early dawn. The sun, though still low, casts a gentle warmth that seems to seep into the very marrow of your bones. You feel the subtle ache in your joints, the lingering stiffness from the day's work, ease with each stretch, each movement a small concession to the body's resilience. The embers in the hearth glow faintly, their light a lingering promise that even as night gives way to day, the fire's memory remains, a quiet ember of continuity. You awaken to the pale light of dawn leaking through the frosted window, the world outside still cloaked in a thin veil of snow that glitters like powdered glass. The air is crisp, each inhalation a sharp, clean intake that fills the lungs with a sense of clarity. The hearth's coals still smolder, their orange glow a soft reminder that the night's heat has not entirely faded. You sit up, the woolen blanket slipping from your shoulders, and feel the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere as the fire's last whispers die away. The dream lingers at the edge of consciousness, a soft afterimage that does not fade entirely but settles like a gentle frost on the mind. You recall the edict of 1855 once more, its promise still echoing in the quiet of the morning, a reminder that even the smallest legal parchment can plant the seed of hope. You think of the Crimean War, of the soldiers whose boots once pressed into the same soil you now tend, and of the way history folds back upon itself, each generation walking the same paths, each footfall a quiet testament to endurance. You rise from the pallet, the wooden floorboards creaking beneath your weight, the sound familiar and reassuring. The village outside is still, the low roofs capped with snow, the thin plumes of smoke rising in lazy curls toward the sky. You step onto the cold floor, the chill of the stone seeping through the soles of your boots, and you feel a calm certainty settle within you, as steady as the rhythm of your own breathing. The day begins anew, and the quiet promise of spring, whispered in the dream, rests lightly on your shoulders. The thin envelope rests on the rough-hewn table, its paper almost translucent in the weak light that filters through the single frosted pane. The wax seal, still warm from the hand that pressed it, bears the initials MV in a hurried, looping script, those of the landlord who lives far beyond the river's bend, where the windows glow like distant lanterns even in the deepest of winters. You lift the envelope with the careful reverence you reserve for anything that might shift the balance of the village's modest ledger, feeling the faint grain of the paper against the pads of your fingertips. The room smells faintly of pine smoke and the lingering scent of the night's fire, a reminder that the hearth has not yet been stoked again. A single oil lamp flickers on a nearby shelf, its amber glow throwing soft shadows across the walls, where the faded icons of saints stare down with patient eyes. You set the envelope beside the ledger, the heavy bound book that records every family's contribution of wood, grain, and labor, its pages yellowed by years of ink, and the occasional spill of water from the well. The script inside the letter is neat, each line drawn with a steady hand that has likely spent more time on parchment than on the fields. The words begin with a formal greeting, then move to the matter at hand, an increased quota of firewood for the coming month. The increase is modest, a few cords more than the requirement set by the 1848 decree that once demanded a steep rise in timber. The landlord's tone is polite, almost obliging, as if he wishes to be seen as considerate. Your diligent service is noted, and we trust you shall meet the modest additional requirement. It reads, the phrasing as smooth as the polished surface of the manor's marble floors. A faint irony curls at the edge of the sentence, like a wisp of smoke that refuses to rise. The landlord, seated in a warm manor far from the frost, expects the serfs to adjust without protest, as if the extra load were as light as a feather. You can almost hear the distant echo of his voice, muffled by the thick walls of his estate, while the villagers outside his doors scrape at the frozen earth with their own breath. The thought brings a quiet smile to your lips, a dry, understated chuckle that does not disturb the stillness of the room. You fold the letter back along its creases, the wax seal cracking softly under the pressure of your thumb. The envelope is placed beside the ledger, where the village scribe will later note the new requirement. The scribe, a wiry man named Ivan, sits at a low bench, his quill poised over a fresh page. He has a habit of tapping the feathered tip against the wood when he thinks, a rhythm that mimics the heartbeat of the village itself. You watch him for a moment, noting the way his ink stains the feather, the way his eyes flick between the letter and the ledger, as if weighing each word against the weight of the wood that will be felled in the weeks to come. Your mind drifts to a story your mother once told you, about a similar demand in 1833 when the landlord insisted on a new barn to be built from serf labor. The villagers complied, their hands raw from the cold, their backs bent under the weight of timber and mud. The barn was finished, but its roof leaked whenever the snow melted, a thin veil of water that dripped onto the stored grain and threatened to spoil it. The memory of that leaky roof lingers like the dampness on the floorboards after a thaw, a reminder that sometimes the solutions offered are as flimsy as an old wooden shingle. You rise from the bench, the woolen trousers rustling softly against the worn boards, and step out into the crisp air of the courtyard. Snow lies in a thin crust over the ground, the faint crunch audible under each footfall. The sky is a pale, overcast gray, the kind that seems to hold its breath, waiting for the sun to decide whether to rise at all. The village is still, The only sounds the distant clatter of a horse's hooves on packed earth, and the low murmur of a few voices gathering near the communal well. The heads of households are already assembling near the well, their breath forming small clouds that rise and disappear in the cold. Mikhail, the broad-shouldered neighbor with the scar on his forearm, stands near the edge of the group, his hands tucked into the sleeves of his thick coat. Beside him, the baker's wife, Anya, carries a basket of freshly baked rye loaves, the crust still warm enough to steam in the air. The village elder, a stoic man named Fyodor, leans on a wooden staff, his beard dusted with frost, his eyes scanning the faces of those gathered, as if measuring the collective resolve. You approach, the envelope still clutched in your hand. The conversation begins in low tones, each word measured, each pause filled with the weight of years spent negotiating with distant authority. The landlord asks for more wood, you say, your voice steady, the words falling like a soft thud of an axe on a log. He says it is modest, but modest for us is still a burden. Mikhail nods, his scar catching the dim light. He writes as if he can feel the cold in his own chambers, he replies, a faint grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. We have learned to speak in the language of the wind, quiet, persistent, never breaking. Anya adds, her voice a gentle rustle like the turning of a page. The extra wood will mean longer hours at the forest's edge, but the fire will keep the children warm longer into the night. It is a trade, as always. Fyodor lifts his staff, the wood polished smooth by countless hands. Arabshchina has always balanced the scales, he says, his tone carrying the calm authority of someone who has watched generations rise and fall. We will divide the load evenly, as the rules of 1850 dictate. Each household contributes its share, and the surplus, if any, will be stored for the next winter's need. A quiet laugh ripples through the group, not a burst of mirth, but a dry, understated chuckle that acknowledges the absurdity of the landlord's considerate tone. The humor is a thin thread that weaves through the tension, a reminder that even in hardship, the villagers find a way to keep the spirit from breaking. You think of the ledger again, of the inked numbers that will soon reflect this new quota. The scribe will write the additional chords beside the names of each family, the columns of wood and grain aligning like the rows of a field waiting to be plowed. The act of recording is itself a quiet act of resistance, a way to make the invisible demands visible, to hold them in the same paper that holds the village's own hopes. The wind picks up, sending a swirl of fine snow across the courtyard, coating the wooden benches and the stone well with a fresh layer of white. The sound of the wind is a soft sigh, like the breath of the forest itself, reminding you that the trees you will fell tomorrow are already whispering their own stories of endurance. You watch a small puff of snow drift down and settle on the edge of the ledger, a tiny fleeting mark that will melt away with the heat of the hearth later. The meeting continues, each head of household offering a brief suggestion, perhaps a shift in the schedule, perhaps a shared effort to split the heavier logs among the younger men, perhaps a promise to send a few extra cords to the communal store in case the river rises again. The elder's voice rises just enough to be heard over the wind. We will keep the fire alive, as we have always done. The landlord may ask, but the village will answer, not with protest, but with steady hands and quiet resolve. You feel the calm resolve settle within you, a quiet certainty that the day's work will be done, that the fire will be fed, that the children will sleep warm. The sun, a pale disk behind the clouds, begins to edge higher, casting a soft, golden hue over the snow-covered roofs, turning the world into a muted tableau of light and shadow the meeting draws to a close. Mikhail claps a hand on your shoulder, the callus of his palm firm yet not unkind. "We will see you at the forest's edge tomorrow," he says, his voice low, "and together we will bring the wood home." You turn back toward the izba, the envelope now tucked safely under your arm, the wax seal still soft to the touch. The path home is lined with birch trees, their white bark stark against the gray sky, their branches heavy with snow that sighs as you pass. Each step is a measured rhythm, the crunch of snow under your boots a steady metronome that matches the beating of your heart. Inside, the fire in the hearth crackles faintly, the embers glowing like distant stars. You set the envelope on the table, the wax seal catching the light, a small, solid reminder of the landlord's distant command. The ledger lies open, its pages waiting for the ink of the scribe, the ink that will turn today's demand into a line of history. You sit for a moment, the warmth of the fire seeping into your bones, the scent of pine and smoke mingling with the faint aroma of the rye bread that Anya left on the shelf. The night outside is quiet, the wind having softened to a gentle murmur, as if the world itself is listening to the quiet resolve that has settled within you. The candle flickers, its flame steady, and you allow yourself a brief pause, feeling the weight of the day's obligations lift just enough to be carried, not borne. In the hush of the izba, you find a calm certainty, a gentle promise that the village will meet the landlord's request, not with resentment, but with the same quiet perseverance that has kept the hearth alive through countless winters. The night deepens and the fire's glow steadies. The hall is low-ceilinged, its walls of rough-hewn pine softened by the steady glow of the central fire. You step across the packed snow that has been brushed from the doorway, feeling the cold bite the soles of your boots before the heat of the room reaches you. The scent of burning wood mingles with the faint, sweet perfume of fresh rye bread that has just been taken from the oven, a scent that seems to hold the memory of wheat fields lying dormant beneath the white blanket outside. A thin wisp of smoke curls upward, curling around the iron chandelier that hangs like a relic from a time when the village still hoped for a brighter future. A large pot of borscht simmers over the flames, its deep crimson surface rippling gently as the broth bubbles. The aroma is a tapestry of beetroot earth, cabbage leaf, and a whisper of smoked pork that has been cured in the winter months and now releases its flavor slowly, as if reluctant to leave the pot. You watch the steam rise, each curl catching the firelight and turning it into fleeting ribbons of amber. The broth scent reaches you before the spoon does, a quiet promise of warmth that settles in your chest like a soft, steady pulse. You take a wooden ladle, its handle worn smooth by countless hands, and draw a portion of the soup into a shallow bowl. The liquid is thick, the beetroot giving it a velvety texture that clings to the sides of the bowl. You lift the bowl to your lips, and the heat spreads through your mouth, down your throat, and into the core of your being. The subtle spiciness of black pepper and a pinch of dried dill, both modest luxuries that travel from the distant markets of St. Petersburg, remind you that even in this remote village, the world beyond the river's bend still reaches in, if only in the form of a single grain of pepper. Around the table, families sit on benches of rough pine, their backs to the fire, their faces illuminated by its flickering light. The children's cheeks are flushed from the cold, their eyes bright with the simple wonder of a night spent listening to the crackle of the fire and the low murmur of adult voices. A girl named Katia, no older than 10, holds a tiny wooden carving in her palm, a birch leaf, its veins etched with a child's earnest hand. She offers it to you with a shy smile, the leaf's edges uneven, its shape imperfect, yet it carries the weight of hope that seems to outshine the winter's gloom. You accept it, feeling the smoothness of the wood against your palm, and tuck it into the pocket of your woolen coat, a quiet token of the village's resilience. The elder, a stoic man with a gray beard that reaches his chest, lifts his cup of kvass, a mildly fermented drink made from rye that carries a faint tang of sourness balanced by a subtle sweetness. He pauses, his eyes scanning the room, and then speaks in a voice that is both gentle and firm, the cadence of someone who has watched many winters come and go. To the fire that keeps us warm, to the soil that will soon yield, he says, his words resonating like a low hymn. The cup clinks against the wooden table, a soft sound that seems to echo the rhythm of the hearth. The toast is brief, but it carries the weight of generations, a reminder that the community's survival rests on both the visible flame and the unseen labor of the earth beneath the snow. You lift your own cup, the amber liquid catching the firelight, and feel the coolness of the metal rim against your lips. The kvass is slightly effervescent, a gentle fizz that lifts the heaviness of the day. As you sip, you notice the faint taste of honey that the village's women have added, a small indulgence that transforms the drink into something more than mere sustenance. The honey, harvested from the hives that survive the winter in the hollow of an old oak, is a reminder that even in the harshest season, life finds a way to produce sweetness around you. Conversations drift like the smoke rising from the fire. A man named Ivan, whose hands are calloused from years of working the fields, speaks quietly about the upcoming sowing season, his voice tinged with a cautious optimism. He mentions the new iron plow that was advertised in a distant newspaper, a piece of technology that seems as unattainable as a summer sunrise in the middle of January. The irony is not lost on you. The plow, a symbol of progress, sits on a page far away, while the village continues to rely on wooden implements that have been passed down through generations. Yet the very mention of it brings a faint smile to the faces of those gathered, a shared acknowledgement that the world beyond the river's bend is moving, even if the village moves at its own measured pace. The children chatter softly, their voices rising and falling like the gentle lilt of a folk song. One boy, his breath visible in the cold air that still clings to the hall's doorway, asks why the village must give so much wood to the landlord each winter. You answer with a half smile, noting that the landlord's manor sits far beyond the river, its windows glowing like distant stars even in the bleakest nights. The boy's eyes widen, and he nods, as if the image of distant, glittering windows satisfies the question for now. The conversation drifts to the upcoming harvest, a subject that feels both hopeful and distant, as the fields are still buried under ice. The elder adds a quiet comment about the importance of patience, reminding everyone that the earth will not yield until the thaw comes, and that the patience required is a virtue cultivated by the very act of waiting. A soft murmur rises as the soup bowls are emptied, the last spoonfuls disappearing into the mouths of those who have been listening to the fire's crackle for hours. The aroma of the borscht lingers in the air, mixing with the lingering scent of fresh bread and the faint, sweet perfume of the birch leaf carving that now rests in your pocket. The fire's glow softens, casting elongated shadows that dance across the walls, turning the rough pine planks into a tapestry of light and dark. The shadows move slowly, as if they, too, are listening to the quiet rhythm of the evening. You feel a gentle fatigue settle in, a contented exhaustion that comes from a day well lived, a community upheld, and a simple meal shared. The fire crackles once more, a subtle reminder of the constancy that carries you through each season. You lean back, allowing the warmth to seep into your shoulders, and let your thoughts drift like the smoke rising toward the ceiling. The hall, with its low ceiling and sturdy beams, feels like a womb that has held generations of serfs, each one adding their own quiet breath to the collective sigh of survival. As the night deepens, the fire's light dims, and the hall grows quieter. The elder's voice lowers, his words becoming a soft murmur that blends with the crackle of the embers. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the rhythm of the fire align with the steady beat of your own heart. The world outside is a silent white, the snow muffling any sound, while inside the hall the warmth persists, a small island of light in a sea of cold. When the last ember finally sighs out, you rise slowly, careful not to disturb the lingering warmth that clings to the wooden floorboards. You step back into the night, the cold air brushing against your cheeks, the sky a deep indigo brushed with the faintest hint of aurora that dances like a distant curtain. The village is hushed, each house a dark silhouette against the snow-covered landscape. You carry with you the memory of the shared meal, the taste of borscht, the smoothness of the birch leaf carving, and the quiet resolve that settles within you like a soft, steady flame. The night embraces you, and you walk home with a calm heart, knowing that the night has settled over the village like a thick woolen shawl shroud, the darkness pressed close but never quite absolute. The thin veil of clouds above the stars lets a faint, cold light filter through, turning the snow into a muted sea of silver. Inside the communal hall, the great iron kettle that had boiled the borscht earlier still sighs, its metal surface cooling in slow, rhythmic breaths. The fire that once roared with the heat of a dozen bodies now hisses low, its embers reduced to a handful of glowing coals that flicker like distant, reluctant stars. You rise from the bench where you had been seated, the wooden slats beneath you creaking in sympathy with the wind that begins to press against the low-ceilinged walls. The shutters on the windows rattle ever so slightly, a soft, percussive reminder that the world beyond the hall is not still. The wind has taken on a more assertive tone, its breath threading through the cracks in the log walls, slipping under the doorways, and finding its way into the folds of your woolen coat. It carries with it the scent of pine and the faint, metallic tang of frozen river water, a reminder that the river, though now a silent, icy ribbon, still holds the memory of its 1849 flood. You pull a thick, hand-knit wool blanket from the bench beside you, the yarn still warm from the fire's lingering heat. The blanket is heavy, its fibers interlaced with the same roughness that has kept generations of serfs warm through harsher winters. You wrap it around your shoulders, feeling the familiar weight settle against your back, a quiet armor against the chill that seeps through the cracks in the walls. The blanket's edges are frayed at the corners, a small testament to the many nights it has endured. Much like the village itself, a low stool sits near the hearth, its legs worn smooth by countless evenings of watchmen and weary hands. You settle onto it, the wood sighing under your weight, a soft, almost apologetic creak that seems to acknowledge the night's solemn duty. Across from you, the fire's glow paints the faces of those who have stayed behind. Pavel, the elder watchman, his hair a silver halo that catches the ember light, a young woman named Marina, whose hands are still stained with flour from the day's baking, and a boy barely 13, his eyes wide but calm, clutching a small wooden spoon as if it were a talisman. Pavel's voice, low and gravelly, begins to weave the tale of the flood of 1849. He speaks of the river's sudden thaw, the way the ice cracked like a brittle pane under the weight of a sudden sun, and how the water surged forward with a force that seemed to swallow the world. He describes the frantic scramble of serfs dragging livestock onto makeshift sleds, the clatter of hooves on frozen ground, and the desperate shouts that rose above the roar of water. His words are measured, each syllable placed with the care of someone who has lived through many seasons of hardship. He mentions how the village's wooden fence posts, once sturdy and reliable, were swept away, leaving only the memory of their presence etched into the mud. There is a quiet irony in his recounting, a subtle smile that flickers across his weathered face as he notes that the river's mood, like the landlord's decrees, is as unpredictable as a winter wind. Both demand respect, he says, his tone dry, yet one can be appeased with a higher embankment, the other with a softer pen. The comment hangs in the air, a faint echo that does not disturb the calm but adds a layer of quiet humor to the night's narrative. You listen, feeling the fire's warmth seep into your shoulders, the heat spreading like a gentle tide across your muscles. The embers crackle occasionally, sending up thin wisps of smoke that curl upward, disappearing into the darkness above the hall's low roof. The smoke carries with it the faint aroma of the day's meals, smoky pork, beetroot, and the lingering scent of fresh rye bread, mixing with the sharper, cleaner note of pine from the firewood. The combination is oddly comforting, a reminder that sustenance and shelter are intertwined in the village's rhythm. Your left hand, still bearing the thin line of a cut from yesterday's axe work, rests on the edge of the stool. The wound is not deep, but the sting is a persistent reminder that even the smallest tasks can leave marks. You flex the fingers, feeling the slight throbbing, and note how the pain is dulled by the fire's heat and the blanket's weight. It is a modest lesson in patience, a quiet acknowledgement that the body, like the village, endures through small, repeated trials. The wind outside grows louder, rattling the shutters with a rhythm that resembles an old piano's keys being pressed in a slow, mournful melody. Snow begins to drift against the walls, the flakes landing in soft, muffled pats that seem to echo the heartbeat of the night. The sound is gentle, not harsh, as if the world is breathing in unison with the fire's low sighs. You watch the snow accumulate in the corners of the hall, forming small white mounds that will melt away with the first light of morning. Marina, her cheeks flushed from the heat, pulls a small piece of dried meat from her pocket and offers it to you. The meat is tough, its flavor seasoned with a pinch of salt and the faint taste of smoked juniper, a flavor that has survived many winters. You accept it with a nod, the simple act of sharing food, a quiet affirmation of the communal bonds that hold the village together. The meat's texture is firm, the chew reminding you of the resilience required to persist through the long, cold months. The boy beside you, his name is Ivan, leans forward and asks a question that catches the attention of the room. Do you think the river will ever rise again like it did in the flood? His voice is tentative, the curiosity of youth tempered by the knowledge of past hardships. Pavel answers in his measured tone, the river will rise when the thaw comes, as it always has. It is not the river that decides, but the season. We learn to read its signs as we learn to read the landlord's letters. There is a faint smile in his words, an acknowledgement that the world's forces are indifferent, yet the people's response is what shapes their fate. You feel a soft fatigue settle into your bones, the kind that comes after a day of steady, unhurried labor. The fire's glow has softened further, the coals now a deep ember red that seems to pulse in time with your breathing. The room is bathed in a warm amber light, the shadows on the walls stretching and shrinking as the flames dance. The quiet of the night is punctuated only by the occasional pop of a coal, the rustle of the blanket as you shift, and the distant lowing of a cow behind the barn, a sound that drifts through the night like a lullaby, steady and reassuring. You glance at the ledger that lies open on the table, its pages filled with neat, black ink entries of wood, grain, and labor contributions. The scribe's quill, a goose feather, rests beside it, its tip still damp from the last entry. The ledger is a silent witness to the village's disciplined record-keeping, a practice that began after the reforms of 1844 aimed to standardize obligations. The entries are modest, reflecting the modest yields of the winter, yet they stand as a testament to the community's perseverance. The night deepens, and the wind's howl begins to recede, as if the world outside is taking a quiet breath, allowing the interior of the hall to become a sanctuary of stillness. The fire's embers glow brighter for a moment, then settle back into their steady rhythm. You feel the gentle pull of sleep, a drowsiness that is not heavy but soft, like a blanket being drawn over you. The warmth from the fire spreads through your shoulders, easing the ache in your muscles, while the blanket's weight steadies your thoughts. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the symphony of the night. The crackle of the fire, the distant wind, the lowing of the cow, the faint murmur of the river's ice beneath the surface. Each sound is a thread in the tapestry of the village's life, woven together with patience and quiet resolve. The memory of Pavel's flood story lingers, a reminder that the village has faced greater torrents and emerged, not unscathed, but intact. A soft sigh escapes your lips, a release of the day's accumulated tension. You allow the breath to slow, matching the rhythm of the fire's flicker. The night watch, though simple in its duties, feels like a rite, a quiet guardianship of the hearth, of the community's heart. The fire's glow reflects in your eyes, a small, steady light that mirrors the constancy you have come to rely upon. With a final, gentle stretch, you settle deeper into the stool, the blanket pulling tighter around you. The ember light casts a warm halo on the wooden walls, and the shadows retreat into the corners, as if taking a momentary rest. The night outside continues its slow, patient dance, the wind now a whisper, the snow a soft blanket over the world. Inside, the fire burns low, the ledger lies open, and the village breathes as one, each heartbeat echoing the next. You let the calm wash over you, the quiet contentment of having tended the fire, listened to stories, and shared a piece of dried meat with a neighbor. The night watch concludes not with a proclamation, but with a simple, unspoken agreement that the fire will keep the darkness at bay, that the wind will eventually soften, and that the village will rise with the dawn, as it always has. The embers' glow dims just enough to invite sleep, and you allow the gentle fatigue to carry you toward rest. You rise before the sun has fully convinced the world to leave its night-cloaked reverie, the thin light already spilling through the frost-etched panes of the izba like a hesitant sigh. The air inside still carries the lingering warmth of the fire that guarded you through the previous hours, a soft ember glow that clings to the corners of the room and refuses to surrender entirely to the cold. Your breath, visible in a thin veil, meets the lingering heat and disappears, a quiet reminder that even the smallest exchanges can hold a measure of comfort. The wooden floor beneath your feet creaks in a familiar, measured rhythm as you pull the woolen blanket from the low-lying chest where it has been folded since the night watch. The wool is thick, hand-spun by the women of the Obshchina, its fibers still bearing the faint scent of lanolin and the faint, lingering perfume of the pine resin that once fed the stove. You slip your feet into the woolen socks that have been mended countless times, each stitch a tiny story of perseverance, and feel the softness press against the cold stone that forms the foundation of the house outside. The village is already stirring, though not with haste. The first sounds are the soft thuds of boots on packed snow, the muffled scrape of a wooden sled being pulled by a pair of gaunt, frost-kissed horses. A thin plume of smoke curls lazily from the door of the neighboring izba, rising in a slow, spiraling dance before dissolving into the pale morning sky. The smoke carries with it the faint, sweet tang of burning birch bark, a scent that has become as much a part of the village's rhythm as the toll of the church bell on Sundays. You step into the doorway, the wooden boards cold beneath your soles, and pause for a moment to let the world settle around you. The snow, still pristine, lies in a soft, powdery blanket over the low, thatched roofs, each one a muted silhouette against the weak light. The river that skirts the edge of the settlement glints faintly, its surface a thin sheet of ice that catches the first hints of sunrise and turns them into a ribbon of silver. The water's quiet murmur is barely audible over the distant lowing of a cow, a sound that has become a nightly lullaby for the serfs who have learned to listen to the land as much as to the Lord's decrees. Your eyes are drawn to the communal hall, its low, timbered roof still darkened by the night's shadows. Inside, the great fire pit that dominates the center of the room has settled into a bed of glowing coals, their orange-red faces still faintly flickering, as if reluctant to surrender their last vestiges of heat. The scribe, a thin man with a careful hand and a habit of tapping his quill against his chin when deep in thought, is already seated at the long wooden table, a fresh sheet of parchment laid before him. The ink bottle, half filled with a dark, slightly viscous liquid, rests within easy reach, its surface catching the dim light and reflecting it in tiny, trembling highlights. You approach the scribe, the weight of the day already settling on your shoulders like a familiar yoke. He looks up, his eyes briefly meeting yours, and offers a nod that carries the unspoken acknowledgement of countless mornings like this one, mornings where the ledger becomes the village's pulse, each entry a beat that measures the collective effort of the serfs. He gestures to the empty space beside him, and you take a seat on the bench, the wood cool against your thighs, the grain of the plank worn smooth by generations of backs that have leaned upon it. The scribe's quill scratches lightly across the parchment as he writes the new day's wood quota, the ink flowing in steady, deliberate strokes. The script is neat, each letter formed with a practiced hand that has learned to balance the weight of authority with the humility required to record it. You watch the ink dry, the black lines darkening against the pale background, and feel a quiet satisfaction in the ritual. The quota, modestly increased from the previous week's tally, reflects the landlord's latest demand, a polite, almost courteous request for a few more logs to keep the manor's great hall warm through an unusually harsh winter. The phrasing in the landlord's earlier missive, "Your diligent service is noted," still echoes in your mind, a thin veil of irony that you have learned to wear like a second skin. When the scribe finishes, he slides the parchment forward, the fresh entry now a part of the communal record. You trace the numbers with a fingertip, the ink still slightly tacky, and feel the weight of the numbers settle into the rhythm of your thoughts. The ledger, bound in worn leather, has become a silent witness to the village's endurance, each page a testament to the balance between obligation and survival. You note the small adjustment, a single extra log per household, an increment that, while seemingly minor, will require an extra trip into the forest for each family. The thought of the forest, with its towering spruce and birch trees bowed under the weight of snow, brings a faint smile to your lips. The forest is both a source of sustenance and a reminder of the labor that defines your days. You rise, the creak of the bench echoing softly, and make your way toward the stack of freshly cut firewood that has been gathered over the past few days. The wood lies in neat piles against the outer wall of the hall, each log bound with a simple rope of twine, the bark still damp from the recent chopping. The scent of pine is sharp and clean, a fragrant contrast to the lingering smoke that clings to the interior of the building. You run a hand over the rough surface of a log, feeling the ridges of the bark, the occasional knot that protrudes like a tiny, stubborn reminder of the tree's life before it was felled. You lift a bundle of firewood, the weight of it settling against your shoulders in a familiar, manageable heft. The bundle is bound with a length of hemp rope, its fibers frayed at the ends from repeated use. As you carry it toward the hearth, the wooden floorboards beneath your boots emit a soft, resonant thud, each step a measured cadence that mirrors the heartbeat of the village itself. The hearth, a stone-lined cavity set into the far wall of the hall, awaits the new wood with an open mouth, its blackened interior still warm from the night's fire. You place the bundle beside the coals, arranging the logs with a practiced eye. The arrangement is not random. The older men of the Obshchina taught you to stack the wood in a crisscross pattern, allowing air to flow through the gaps and ensuring that the fire will catch easily and burn steadily. You lay the first log across the coals, its dry bark crackling as it meets the lingering heat, sending a brief flare of orange light up the low ceiling. The sound is soft, a gentle pop that seems to echo the quiet of the morning, and you watch as the flames begin to lick the new wood, their tongues spreading slowly, confidently. The fire responds, its glow growing brighter, the orange-red tongues reaching higher, casting a warm, amber light across the faces of the villagers who have begun to gather. Their eyes still heavy with sleep, brighten as the fire's heat reaches them, the subtle shift in temperature a reminder that the day is beginning to take shape. A woman in a faded linen dress, her hair tucked under a simple kerchief, offers you a small piece of cheese from a wooden board. The cheese is firm, its surface speckled with tiny holes, the scent of milk and a faint tang of herbs that have been added during the previous night's milking. You accept it with a nod, the cheese's coolness a pleasant contrast to the growing warmth of the fire. You bite into the cheese, the texture yielding under your teeth, a subtle graininess that speaks of the modest dairy production of the village. The flavor is simple, unadorned, yet it carries within it the labor of the cows that have been tended through the bitter cold, the careful milking in the early mornings, the careful curdling and pressing that have turned milk into a food that can endure the winter months. The cheese, like the fire, is a small, steady source of sustenance, a quiet affirmation that life continues even when the world outside is a sea of white. The light from the fire reflects off the icy river beyond the hall's small window, turning the water's surface into a glittering mirror that captures the sunrise's first pale hues. The sky, still a muted gray, begins to blush with a soft pink, the sun's rays stretching thin fingers across the horizon, coaxing the snow into a gentle, golden sheen. The village, bathed in this early light, seems to hold its breath, each roof and chimney a silhouette against the growing brightness. You turn your attention to the other villagers who have gathered, their faces marked by the same quiet endurance that you have come to recognize as the hallmark of serf life. An older man, his beard flecked with white, leans on his cane and watches the fire with a calm, steady gaze. A young mother, her child cradled in her arms, hums a low, wordless tune that blends with the soft crackle of the flames. Children, their cheeks flushed from the cold, sit cross-legged on the floor, their eyes wide with curiosity as they watch the fire dance dot in the background. The scribe continues to write, his quill moving with a rhythm that matches the fire's pulse. He pauses occasionally to glance at the ledger, his brow furrowing slightly as he records the new quota, then looks up to meet the eyes of those around him, offering a brief, reassuring smile. The ledger, now thicker with the addition of today's entry, rests on the table like a silent witness to the community's collective effort. You feel a subtle shift within yourself, a quiet acknowledgement that the day's work is already underway, that the simple act of adding wood to the fire is both a literal and metaphorical contribution to the village's survival. The fire's heat spreads through the hall, reaching the backs of the benches, the soles of the boots, the very marrow of those who sit within its glow. It is a reminder that the warmth you help create is not merely for the manor's distant windows, but for the hearths of your own home, for the small, stone-capped kitchen where your family will gather later to share a modest meal. The conversation around you drifts, low and measured, as villagers discuss the tasks that lie ahead. A farmer mentions the need to repair a broken fence that has been weakened by the frost, his tone dry but tinged with a faint humor about the fence's stubbornness. It seems the wood refuses to stay straight. Just as the landlord's demands never bend, a young man, his hands still calloused from the previous day's chopping, speaks of the upcoming sowing season, his voice carrying a quiet optimism that the soil once thawed will yield enough grain to meet the landlord's expectations and perhaps leave a small surplus for the village's own stores. You listen, the words weaving into the ambient soundscape of the fire's crackle, the distant lowing of cattle, the soft rustle of woolen garments as people shift in their seats. The atmosphere is one of steady, unhurried purpose, each person contributing their part to the communal rhythm that has sustained the village through countless winters. The subtle irony of the landlord's polite request for more firewood, juxtaposed against the villagers' quiet determination to meet it without complaint, hangs in the air like a faint, invisible thread that binds you all together. A gentle wind begins to stir outside, carrying with it a faint scent of pine and the distant echo of a church bell tolling the hour. The bell's low tone reverberates through the wooden walls, a reminder of the spiritual cadence that punctuates daily life, marking the passage of time with a solemn, measured rhythm. The sound blends with the fire's soft roar, creating a harmonious backdrop that seems to cradle the village in a cocoon of sound and warmth. You rise once more, the fire's heat still clinging to your skin, and move toward the doorway to step outside for a moment. The cold greets you immediately, a crisp, clean bite that makes the breath in your lungs feel sharp and alive. You inhale deeply, the air filling your lungs with a clarity that only winter can provide. The snow, now illuminated by the rising sun, sparkles like a field of tiny crystals, each one catching the light and reflecting it back in a soft, muted glow. You pause on the threshold, looking back at the hall where the fire continues to burn, its flames steady and unhurried. The village behind you is beginning to stir fully now. Shutters open, doors swing, and the low murmur of voices rises gradually, like a tide that has been waiting for the right moment to come in. You feel the weight of the day settle upon you, not as a burden, but as a familiar mantle that you have learned to wear with quiet acceptance. Returning to the hall, you take a moment to sit once more by the fire, the embers glow, painting your face with a soft, amber light. You close your eyes briefly, allowing the warmth to seep into your muscles, the heat traveling from the surface of your skin to the deeper layers, easing the stiffness that the night's watch has left behind. The fire's rhythm, the gentle crackle, the occasional pop of a log giving way, becomes a lullaby for the senses, a steady pulse that aligns with your own heartbeat. You think of the reforms that have been whispered about in the village, of the distant edicts that speak of possible emancipation, of the faint hope that one day the serf's bond to the land might be loosened, that the landlord's demands might become a thing of the past. The thought is both distant and intimate, like a star that can be seen through the thin veil of clouds but remains out of reach. Yet the very act of recording the quota, of gathering wood, of tending the fire, is a small affirmation that you are part of a larger story, a thread woven into the fabric of history. Even if the pattern is not yet fully visible, you open your eyes, the fire's light reflecting in them, and notice the small, half-finished wooden toy that rests on a nearby shelf, a tiny horse, its legs uneven, its body carved with a child's earnestness. The toy, a symbol of innocence and imagination, sits amidst the practical tools of daily life, a reminder that even in the harshest of winters, the village nurtures dreams and creativity. You pick it up gently, feeling the smoothness of the wood, the faint scent of pine that still clings to it, and you smile faintly, acknowledging the quiet resilience that lives not only in the labor of chopping wood, but also in the simple act of carving a toy for a child. The fire continues to burn, its glow steady, its heat a constant companion. You place the wooden horse back on the shelf, its presence a small, quiet testament to the balance between work and wonder that defines life here. The day stretches before you, a long, unhurried road of tasks and moments, each one a step in the rhythm that has carried your ancestors through generations of snow and toil. You lean back, the wooden bench creaking softly under your weight, and let the fire's light wash over you, the amber hues mingling with the pale morning that now filters through the windows. The world outside remains a blanket of white, the river still a silver thread, the sky a soft canvas of pastel hues. Inside, the hall is alive with the low hum of conversation, the occasional clink of a wooden spoon against a pot, the subtle rustle of woolen garments as people shift to find comfort. You breathe in the scent of pine smoke, the faint aroma of fresh bread that has yet to be baked, the lingering hint of the cheese you tasted. Each inhalation feels like a gentle affirmation, a quiet acknowledgement that you are part of something larger, a community bound by shared labor, shared meals, shared stories, and the steady, unassuming fire that will keep you warm through the long winter ahead. As the fire settles into a steady, low burn, the room grows quieter, the conversations softening into murmurs, the crackle of the flames becoming a gentle, rhythmic backdrop. You close your eyes once more, feeling the warmth spread through your shoulders, the calm certainty of the day's rhythm settling like a soft blanket over your thoughts. In this quiet moment, you sense the continuity of the village's heartbeat, steady and unassuming, a promise that each sunrise will bring the